So, welcome everybody to our Ask the Experts webinar about peperomia. I'm Diane Blazek. I'm the Executive Director for National Garden Bureau, and I have with me Gail Pabst, who is managing everything to make sure we go smoothly and telling me when I mess up on something, which is quite often. But hopefully that doesn't happen today. I will introduce our experts and we'll let each of them then give a little bit of information about themselves. We have Justin Hancock from Costa Farms. We have Heather Von Alman from Dooman Orange. And we have Gary Hunter from Gary's Specialty Plants. So, Justin, do you want to say a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure thing. So I am a horticulturist. Got a horticulture degree from University of Wisconsin back in the day. Costa Farms is the largest houseplant grower in the world. We're a fourth generation family run farm based out of Miami, Florida. And we grow more than a dozen different peperomia in our different collections. You can find Costa Farms peperomia and other plants across the United States and Canada.
Excellent. Heather, you want to talk a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure, yes. My name is Heather Von Allman, and I'm the product manager for Dooman Orange's succulent and foliage lines. The foliage is fairly new to Dooman. They're primarily a color breeding company. So when you think about petunias, calibrachoa, that's Dooman. Foliage is such a huge trend, it can't be ignored. So we do have a line. There's over 50 foliage items in our foliage line, and 18 of those are peperomias. And there's a lot of really interesting breeding going on in peperomias that we're looking forward to bringing to the market.
Excellent. Thank you. And Gary.
Yes, I have Gary's Specialty Plants. We're in Drumore, Pennsylvania, which is Lancaster County, 2 hours west of Philadelphia. I'm a wholesale grower, and we distribute our plants to 75 independent garden centers on the East Coast, about 200 miles from our location here. We primarily grow small pots, 2.5-inch pots, and small hanging baskets, and they're all house plants. So we have about 40 peperomia types and a lot of other assorted foliage.
That sounds great. So I think that explains why we have invited these three people to be our guests today on Ask the Experts. A little bit of housekeeping. I wanted to tell everybody that if you have questions, please put them in the chat function. Gail and I will be monitoring that and trying to ask all the questions that are posed to our panelists. If I don't get to it right away, it might be because it's just naturally on my list of questions to ask later. A good tip is to set your Zoom for speaker view. That way, instead of seeing everybody that's on this webinar, you can see the person who's actually speaking at that time. And we do have a quick little PowerPoint to show and explain some of the different types of peperomia. And so once we're finished with these 7 or so slides, I will quit sharing my screen. Then you can see each speaker nice and large on your screen. You can really get to know them close up. So, okay, with our experts, we will go to the first type of peperomia here. And I think, Justin, you were going to kick off some of the explanations here about this type of peperomia.
Thank you, Diane. Watermelon peperomia is one of the more popular varieties right now, largely because it has the silver variegated foliage. And we're seeing that silver variegation added to just about any plant greatly increases its popularity with houseplant parents. Happily, this is a nice, easy variety to grow in the right conditions. Medium to bright light is best. Like all peperomia, it's got that Goldilocks zone where you don't want to give it too much or not enough water. For me, I try to keep the soil moist, about an inch and a half deep in a 6-inch pot. One of the great things about this variety is that in terms of sort of the peperomia family, it's a medium-sized one. So you can have it on your desk or a tabletop, and it has some good presence. It's not too small, but also it won't grow out of bounds.
Okay, any of our other panelists want to add anything quickly about the watermelon type of peperomia?
It seems it's another one of those plants that it's not so easy in propagation, so the supply is always limited and it's always in demand. I guess a question, most people, do they start it from cuttings or tissue culture, or is that too technical of a question? I don't
No,
know.
it's not. But Heather, I was going to put you on the spot and ask if you could explain the word propagation and the different types. And you kind of did go in there as far as cuttings and tissue culture, but I think that would be helpful because you are our expert. So explain the difference between the two types.
So with plants, well, I have to back it up even further. A lot of plants start from clones that are offshore that are then kept as stock plants. So they're in a vegetative state, and then those cuttings are taken, shipped to growers that then put roots on them and finish them. So that's how the cuttings work to start plants. And then tissue culture is when they go into the meristem and they could take out the cells, and then they start replicating that way, cloning that way. And then eventually you get like a little plantlet with roots that grows in a nutrient rich kind of sterile media. And then those get pulled out and then weaned and rooted and eventually become a finished plant. But it seems like with peperomias, some of them, a lot of them don't take well to producing cuttings, and they come from tissue culture.
Okay.
I can say,
Sorry.
I can say here at Costa Farms, we are able to do our watermelon through traditional cuttings. Most of our other larger peperomia, 6-inch peperomia, we do via tissue culture.
Okay.
And to jump on to what Heather said, I think a great way to kind of think about tissue culture from the grower side is that when you take a cutting, you get one plant out of it. But when you take a cutting and put it into tissue culture, you might get 30, 40, 50, 100 plants out of it.
So just two different ways to reproduce little baby plants so that hopefully there's a better supply. So, okay, good. And you guys, if you want to circle back to that with any of these other types that we're going to talk about, we're going to go next to the ripple type. I think, Heather, you were going to talk about this one a little bit.
Yes, and this is one of those plants that people either love or they don't love it. The leaves are very heavily corrugated. Right now we're showing the red, which at Duman we call it raisinette. There's also a whole wide variety of colors that are in this type of plant with a lot of grays and silvers. It does tend to throw up flowers pretty easily, and I don't think you can discuss peperomia without talking about the flowers. I think nobody loves the flowers pretty much because they're not that attractive. It's like a spadix that looks like a little tail that comes out, and ripple does tend to throw out its fair share of flowers, but in plant collections, because it has that nice textural foliage, some unique colors, it's a great plant to put like in sets. Like if you have something like tall, something with like a bold texture, and then you can put your ripple there. It does well in 2-inch, 4-inch, up to 6-inch. Does really well in terrarium gardens or people that do little dish fairy gardens. And an interesting thing with peperomias, they're also called the radiator plants, and I guess they got that name from back in the day when people would have their radiators. It was one of the plants that could survive the winter, like sitting there over the dry heat. So it's unique that it can take our low humidity air conditioning and heat without, it doesn't bother them, which is interesting too, because they are a tropical plant. So ripple, love it or hate it. I love it, except when it flowers.
And you brought up something that I was going to ask everybody about, common names that I would know by. So I think we kind of got the first one, the watermelon, and now you called the ripple the radiator. So for the rest of our experts, as you're going through each one, if there's not a common name on there and you want to toss out one or two that you know, that the home gardener or the homeowner might know that peperomia by a common name, go ahead and toss that out because that's always interesting. Okay,
From actually, if you don't mind me jumping in, from a plant styling standpoint, I love putting red varieties like Duman's Raisinette or Costa Farms' Shumi Red with the watermelon, because you get that fun contrast of the dark red against the silver variegation. But then it also highlights watermelon's red pets, which makes for a really fun classic combination.
good point. Plant styling. So that's not just for photo shoots. That's for me in my foyer also to combine those things. Okay, good, good. Next up, who was taking this one? Justin, I think this is yours.
Yep. So this may be like the classic peperomia. Some people call it baby rubber tree or baby rubber plant, because it has some superficial representation of Ficus elastica, or the true rubber tree. And this one among peperomia is kind of interesting because you may see it offered as a succulent, you may see it offered as a tropical houseplant. It has a wide range of uses there. Among peperomia, it's somewhat low water. Like other peperomia, medium to bright light is great. There are a number of variegated cultivars. Some have like a golden yellow variegation around the edges. Some are more of a kind of a camouflage green and cream pattern. They all look really lovely. In brighter light, you might get some more of that red petiole action, which is always fun. And this one among peperomia can also get fairly large. I've seen them get 12 or more inches tall.
Excellent. Okay, the next one we have, if nobody has any other comments, let's see here. Gary, I think this one's yours.
Yes, we grow this one. It has naturally shiny leaves, and it zoomed around on the internet because it looks very similar to another popular plant, Chinese money plant, which is actually a Pilea peperomioides, which just means it looks like a peperomia. So this is referring back to this plant. It's upright, grows well as a house plant, and we've learned it can be very, very dry and recover no brown leaves or anything from being dry. So if you're a homeowner and you never water anything, this could be one of your plants. We like it because it's attractive because it's shiny, and we sell a lot, so you should be able to find some in your garden center.
That sounds excellent. Any other common names that it might go by?
Well, Raindrop was the common name that we use for it. I don't know if that's universally accepted or not, but we were hoping if we'd sell enough with Raindrop on the tag that we'd win. It'd be called Raindrop. So, I think on the internet you can search for Raindrop and find this plant.
That's what we grow it as too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're winning, Gary. It's Raindrop. So.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got Raindrop up for that one. And then next up is the string of turtles. And I think, Gary, you were going to do this one also.
Yes, this is a trailing, low-growing plant. The species name prostrata, meaning low-growing. Luckily, we have the common name of string of turtles. It's hard to see on that picture, but I have a plant here. When we go later, I can show you. The top of the leaf looks like the back of a turtle. It's a string of turtles. And common names are very helpful, help sell the plants. So we like them. I don't know. There was such a high demand. In general, house plants are booming. If people don't see that, so rare plants are in short supply, and we just now getting enough propagated of string of turtles to supply the demand.
but we like a high demand, right?
We like that,
That's
yes.
always a good thing, yeah. And, I'm looking at this one and you say, the common name will sell it, and I'm just thinking, "Oh my gosh, wouldn't this be a great plant for kids to grow for that fact, or maybe as a teacher's gift because it would do great, sitting on a desk or something." But okay, that's awesome. Let's go to the next one. Let's hear who's doing this one. Heather, I think this is
That's
back to you
me.
now.
So yeah, the rotundifolia, which is another one of the little trailing peperomias. As Gary said, trailing plants are so popular right now, and anything that kind of has that string type of look is very, very popular. Rotundifolia is slightly fussier than some of the upright, more succulent ones. The leaves don't have that same fleshiness quite as you find in a lot of other ones, but it's still, I think, a lot easier to care for than, say, like a ficus or something like that. So like in a little trailing 4-inch or a hanging basket, it's still going to be a pretty low maintenance type of house plant. And that's something that carries across all the different peperomias, is their ease of care. This does prefer a little bit less light. You'd want to put it in some indirect light. It would tend to burn if it's like in full sunlight or something like that. And it is just a really cute trailing house plant. I don't really have a common name for it. I think I've heard
Okay.
it called string of nickels, but I
Yeah.
can't swear on that.
So one of the things that I was wanting to talk about, and I think what we'll do is we'll finish the next couple of slides, and then I might put you guys on the spot and ask to rank them like from easiest to grow to hardest to grow, because I think we've got some questions like that. So be thinking of that while we go through these last couple of slides. Oh, actually, I think this one is the last slide. Let's see here. Gary, I think you were going to present this one.
Yeah, well, we grow this, don't sell very many, but it's very interesting, upright, grows slowly, houseplant conditions. It's probably not that common in a garden center, but
Mhm.
there are people that are collectors of peperomia, and there's hundreds of them, and we keep trying to find new ones, and we get people that'll pay a lot for the one they don't have, and this, if you like the way it looks, that could be one of the rare ones.
Okay, so hey, if you're looking for something unique and you want a rare version, this is the one you look for.
Yes.
So here's
Okay.
an odd thing that I was reading some old journals about peperomias, and there used to be a National Peperomia Society
Is
based
that?
in Florida, and it's gone now. I was trying so hard to find it because I wanted to see what they were saying, and I guess it was disbanded. Do you know it, Gary?
I don't, but I'm in the Gesnerian Society hobby group, but
Mhm.
the fact that there actually was hundreds of people that cared enough about peperomia to have a society is kind of amazing.
I thought so too, but I think they were absorbed by something else. I'm not sure.
There's probably a Facebook group. That might be the newer version of a society like that, is some Facebook group. Maybe we should
Well,
start a Facebook group and put that on there. So, okay, so that was all of our slides. So let's now, I think, like I said, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you guys had to name which one of these you think is the easiest to grow, what would it be? And which one do you think takes a little bit more TLC?
I think obtusifoli is the easiest. Um,
This one?
yeah, yes.
Okay.
I think it's the most out there for a reason, because it's ease, ease in production, easy for the homeowner. It's a great plant.
And then Heather, which one would you say might give you a little bit of a challenge?
The last one, that the tetragona, I've never even seen it on the market. So
Yeah.
I would make the assumption based on that it's not easy.
Okay, Gary, what do you think? Would you agree with the easy and TLC ones that Heather just mentioned?
Well, I want to promote Raindrop because I've learned, as I've mentioned before, that thing can be so dry you say it's dead. Well, it just comes back to life. It doesn't show any brown or anything. shiny leaves. So I like that one. It's easy to grow. I have one over at my west window here. It's been in there 3 years and just lives. So that's enough recommendation for me.
Okay, so that's your choice. And somebody did just ask, and I think you brought this up, Gary, when you were talking about this one. This is not the Pilea or the Chinese money plant. Different family of plants entirely, correct?
Yes, different genus. So they just happen to look alike. And hobby people that have both tell me they like Raindrop better because it lives more easily. The other one, Chinese money plant, if it gets too dry, it flops down and it'll recover, but it's just not.
Okay. So Justin, did you give your easiest to grow and the TLC one?
Well, I'm going to start with a caveat because easy to grow in the plant world is really how well you can meet its conditions. And the way that translates, I think, to is this easy is how well does the plant do in average household conditions? So just because we say this is easiest might not be your experience if you have a different set of conditions than what's average. But for me, the obtusifolia is definitely the easiest, the most tolerant. And of the ones that I've grown that we've shown on the screen, it's the prostrata that tends to be a little more fussy about water. It's a little more sensitive, especially to getting overwatered, at least in my experience.
Okay, because somebody asked if it was difficult to grow. So it's a little fussier, but maybe not difficult. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yeah, yeah. If your watering is on point and you've got good light, you're probably going to find it's not so bad. But if you're a beginner, I might not recommend starting with this one right out the gate.
Okay, that's good advice. So I'm going to go ahead and take the screen off because, well, let's hear. Yeah, I'm going to take the screen off. That way we'll focus on our speakers. And one of the questions that we have posted is about fertilization. And I am aware that it may depend. We get that answer a lot when we're asking about fertilization because it may be different for the different types of peperomia. So, who wants to jump in here and talk about how to fertilize, when to fertilize, if you should fertilize?
All right, I'll jump in there. So with most houseplants, I would say the minimum that you could get away with, if you want to keep the plant happy, is like a time release fertilizer once a year. Again, that's probably the minimum that I would recommend. The more you fertilize, the more your plant will grow, the happier it will be, especially if you have good conditions. And depending on the product, some of these houseplant fertilizers are formulated to be able to use every week. Others might be once a month, so there's not really a one size fits all recommendation. In general, I typically recommend fertilizing in spring or summer when the plant is in active growth and not trying to push a lot of growth in autumn and winter, especially if you've got lower light conditions or you're in the north like I am where the days are really short, and just give the plant more of a resting period.
That's true. Most indoor conditions are not conducive to plant growth. So the plant effectively is just kind of in this like hibernation type of status. And what Justin was saying, you do only want to fertilize during periods of active growth. Otherwise, you're just dumping stuff on the soil that the plant's not going to take up anyway. And then, which leads into overwatering a lot of times, which, as you know, Diane, that's my thing. People need to stop watering so much.
And
Anyway.
something that was my next question is what's the number one mistake that people might make with their peperomia or houseplants in general?
Overwatering. Yes. Does everyone agree?
Exactly.
Yeah, and And sadly, most plants, including peperomia, would rather stay too dry consistently than too wet. Being too wet, there's a lot more damage to the roots, and it's harder for the roots to recover.
They can't breathe when they're waterlogged, and yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
they smother.
Okay. So now I'm not sure which question here to ask first, because so I'm going to ask both questions and you guys can address them in the order that you think is best. Um, what about taking your peperomia outside during warmer months? Is that a good idea or a bad idea? And then the next question was about pests and diseases on your peperomia. So I don't know if your answer is don't take them outside because there's more of a tendency for pests and diseases, or take them outside, it doesn't matter, this is what you do. So that's kind of a two-part question and maybe two separate things, or it may be tied together. So I'll let you guys explain that.
I would say it's okay under like protection, like on a patio or something where there's like a lath or some type of cover. I wouldn't put them out in full sun, but then that's my region here because the sun's really intense. But I don't think it opens them up to more pests. I think if you have a healthy plant, the pests tend to stay away from it. It's when you have conditions and the plant's health is suffering that you end up with pests, whether it's like mealybug or fungus gnats or something like that.
I totally agree with Heather. Personally, I'm more of a lazy houseplant person. And I don't like to move mine in and out just because it's one more thing for me to do. And I rationalize it by thinking, when a plant changes environment, it's adding stress. And so it's just one less set of stresses, acclimating to being indoors, and then at the end of the season, acclimating back to being out. Sorry, other way around. Acclimating to going out and then acclimating to being back inside. But if you do move it outside in a shaded spot, it will definitely enjoy the higher light intensity. In a lot of areas, the greater relative humidity you'll see outside than inside because of air conditioning. And so, you'll probably get a lot more growth and a lot faster growth.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Gary, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Well,
we,
I had
we
a-
missed
that-
you for a few minutes.
Well, I had a screen freeze and then anyway, and a mute. So you can hear me. I'm good.
You're good. Yes.
Well, I want people to take their plants outside if they have a nice shady porch. Again, I keep promoting the Raindrop. If we could add the summer to the sales with a mixed planter, you got mixed planters with flowers, and if you need a green foliage plant, the Raindrop could be it. So, but Justin pointed out that there's a transition, and you go from indoor low light to outdoor brighter light. Sometimes it'll burn, so then you think you got a disaster, which you sort of do. So they can be outside. The transition is tough, but it's worth the effort.
So maybe, am I hearing you correctly that maybe you should be putting them with begonias or impatiens, something that might be in the shade? That would be a good mix container outdoors.
Absolutely, begonias or impatiens. Problem with impatiens, they want to take over the whole pot, but you can deal with that.
Yeah.
Because they're going to
Snip off their
grow.
branches, right?
They're going to grow 3 times faster than a foliage plant. So
True, yeah. But that's a great idea and a great point. Okay.
I'd like to make. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay because I was moving on. I think you've got another important point to make.
It's not important, but jumping on what Gary said, the way that I like to translate it for people is I live in the north, and so I am bundled up all winter long. And that first nice day where I go out like in short sleeves, I get sunburned. And it's the exact same thing for plant leaves if they're not acclimated. Unfortunately, my sunburn heals. Unfortunately for the plant, it doesn't. That damage on that leaf is permanent. And so you just have to wait for the plant to put out new leaves, for it to look attractive again.
That was an important point. I like that.
Okay, thank you.
So that was good. Okay. So I think we've covered the light, unless you guys have anything else. What I'm hearing is if you take them outdoors, make sure that there's some sort of shade production. Indoors, bright diffused light. Is that what I heard? Is that the proper recommendation that you would make indoors, is bright diffused light?
Yes.
Okay. Anything
And
else about light needs for peperomia?
natural or artificial light is just fine, or a mix, so you can have it in that east or west facing window. You can have it under a little LED, or, back when I lived in Iowa, I grew a lot of my houseplants under those cheap shop lights that I got from Menards.
Or any mass merchant or hardware store?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay. So what about humidity? A lot of times people think that houseplants need humidity, and we haven't really talked about that. So what are the humidity needs for peperomia, and does it vary by the type?
It it does vary, but that is one of the interesting things about peperomia, is like what I mentioned earlier, that it did get the common name as the radiator plant, and it actually, it wasn't just the ripple, it was kind of across the whole species. They just found that it did well against like heat and air conditioning, and I guess heat's been around longer than air conditioning, so that was the first test. And it does come from the jungles too, which kind of, it seemed to confound horticulturalists or botanists in the beginning, because they just assumed that these plants would need humidity. But then they were like, wow, it has this weird, almost succulent like foliage, but they're not succulents. They're different from like a crasula and echeveria. And then on top of that, they do perform really well indoors, and that's why they've been embraced by the houseplant world. That they prefer humidity, but they do very well without it. But it seems that the thicker the leaf, the more tolerant they are. The thinner the leaf, the more they need regular houseplant type of conditions with some humidity.
Okay. You had brought up that they're tropical, they're rainforest. Where are they native to? Like where would you find these growing in the wild?
A lot of come out of South America, Thailand. I don't know. Do y'all know if any come out of Africa? It seemed like most of them were like Argentina, Brazil, rainforest type of plants.
Yeah, I think all of the ones I'm familiar with are rooted in South Central America.
Awesome. Are any of them edible? Have you tried?
No. But when you crush, because they're related to the pepper plant, piper, and when you crush the foliage, it does kind of have a distinct, sharp, peppery smell, which just kind of shows that it's related.
So pepper as in peppercorns and black pepper, not as in capsicum pepper. So
Correct.
they're a
Yeah,
member
pepper,
of the
piper. Yeah,
peppercorn family.
yeah, Piper nigrum. It's a tropical vine. I think it's zone 12 or something, so it's nothing we'll ever see here. But they're in the same family.
In horticulture school, one of the first lessons we learned in one of my plant ID classes is that there's a clear distinction between edible and palatable. And so that may be the case with peperomia. Is, yeah, you can eat it, you might not enjoy it. That said, I would never recommend eating eating anything that you buy from a store that's not grown specifically for edible use, because you don't know what fertilizers, you don't know what pesticides may have been used to treat that plant in its growth cycle.
Excellent points. Yes. And before somebody asks it, I know somebody will ask, what about being toxic to pets? Are these houseplants toxic to pets or non-toxic?
They are considered non-toxic, but I would go back to that. You never know what was used to grow. And I know, like here at Costa Farms, we've also run into a couple of situations over the years where a pet had a really bad reaction to a non-toxic plant because that pet happened to have an allergy or a sensitivity. Just like some people can have allergies to shellfish or peanuts, but the rest of us are fine with them. So I would never assume a plant is safe.
So if all possible, keep them out of the mouths of pets. So
And
that's always
children.
good advice. And children, absolutely, right. Let's see here. One of the questions I wanted to go back to is the flowering one. So there's only one type of peperomia that actually puts on flowers, and
Oh,
I think,
no.
oh no, no, no.
They
Okay.
all flower, yeah.
Okay, so expand on that then.
Um, I was trying to find out like what causes it to flower. I know with some it's temperature related. We have one in production called the angulata, and if it gets below 59 degrees, it just wants to throw up flowers and it stops growing vegetatively and just throws up a lot of flowers, and it's very unattractive in that state. And some of the flowers can smell not so pleasant also. So it's like the opposite of what you would think of with a flower. In most cases, I think a homeowner should just take the flowers off if they don't like it. In production, it would just be a whole different thing to take care of.
Uh,
Yep, there we go.
I have a picture when we're talking around the flowers. I hold it in the right spot here.
Just a little
There you
higher.
go.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, higher. Well, I wanted to know botanically what these type of flowers are called. I looked up, but I never really did find the answer. The common one was rat tail, and I thought that's not rat tail. That's not very interesting, or not a good name. So anyway, every peperomia that I have at some point with age will flower, and it'll be this long, pointy flower type. Here's the other one. Get this up in here. This is the string of turtles, and there's the flower, and there's a flower. So Heather was saying, if you don't like them, take them off. There's nothing, they don't add much to the plant. So peperomia grown for their foliage, interesting shapes. We have all colors. We've shown reds and greens, and I don't know whether we showed this. That one wasn't in your thing, but this is a silver called Peperomia incana. It's velvet, common name, velvet plant, maybe. Anyway, it happens to be flowering right there too.
Whatever you're doing in your office is encouraging some flowering, it looks like, or you purposely brought the flowering ones for the webinar.
Yeah, I brought this out of the greenhouse this morning. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome.
I tricked you.
Yeah. Nope, that's good. And that way we got to see it. But I mean, it makes sense. I mean, to me, it's just pinch those flowers off if they're not going to add that much and put the energy back into growing a little bit larger, better peperomia, it sounds like.
Right.
Awesome. Okay, what are some mistakes that people make? And I think we mentioned earlier overwatering, so that's one. Are there any other common mistakes that you see are made when it comes to growing peperomia, or for that matter, any houseplants?
Full sun. We talked about moving them indoors and out. So if you do move them, acclimating them properly. And then another watering mistake people make is if they allow the pot to get too dry, the soil pulls away from the edge of the pot. So when they water, the water just goes around the edge of the soil ball and down the bottom. And they think they're watering the plant, but there's very little water actually getting into the soil. So it just compounds the problem, and the plant just gets drier and drier.
Is there a solution for that? If you've let it get too dry and it kind of becomes hard as a rock and the water just drains from it, what would be your solution on how to revive that soil?
Well, I do this often because I underwater. I get just like a watering can and I very slowly drip water around the base of the plant and let it soak in and just make sure I don't put so much water on it that it then like follows itself to the edge of the pot. So it takes a little bit longer, but it allows the soil to rehydrate.
Excellent. And speaking of water, a lot of us live in municipalities where we have chlorinated water. Can you use chlorinated water, or should you let it sit out a while, or should you use a different type of water? What's the recommendation there?
In most communities, tap water is just fine. I have never seen water quality issues pop up with peperomia. Now, if you are concerned about the amount of chlorine, there is the recommendation that you often see to let your water like sit out overnight so the chlorine can evaporate. An important thing there is to check to see if your municipality, what kind of chlorine your municipality uses. There is a compound that a lot of communities are switching to called chloramine, and chloramine does not dissolve out, and so letting your water sit out overnight won't actually do any good in that case. And then I think chlorine tends to get the worst reputation, but a lot of plants are more sensitive to fluoride. Happily, peperomia not so much, but fluoride tends to be more problematic for more types of houseplants. And unfortunately, that one doesn't dissolve out either.
So then what do you do if you have fluoride in your water?
So if you have too much fluoride or chloramite in your water for your houseplants, as weird as it sounds, diluting it, to reduce the concentration of that compound in the water. So, doing like 3/4 tap water, 1/4 rainwater, 1/4 bottled water. If you don't want to go all out with bottled water, rainwater, or another source that doesn't have a high concentration in it.
Interesting.
Okay, good advice. Somebody's asking about pH requirements. I mean, would you ever do the pH levels of your water to determine what's good or bad? I'm assuming since all of you deal with growing and propagation on the commercial level, you definitely have to. What about for the home gardener?
That's one I have also never seen come up as an issue. I think most communities treat their tap water enough so that it doesn't go too far out of bounds for people or most plants.
Okay, so luckily, what we're drinking and putting in our own bodies is quite all right for our peperomia plants as well. Okay, so that's the water. Part of that, there was a question about fertilization. Part of that was a question about what kind of soil types are good for peperomia. So, who wants to tackle all that other stuff that the roots are in or need?
They don't seem to have that special of needs with their soil, like a core or just a regular soil blend with equal parts peat or perlite. I'm drawing a blank. What's the
Or
white
what about
stuff? What is perlite? Yeah, sorry.
the mixes, like an indoor plant
Yeah, any
mix, or you probably don't want
type
one
of
for flowering plants, but probably just an indoor plant mix. There's sometimes special mixes for succulents, so maybe the more succulent types would want that.
If you tend to overwater, or if you're afraid that you have a tendency to overwater, a cacti succulent mix might be good for some of those thicker types like the obtusifolia, the clusifolia, even some of the ones like the name just jumped out of my head, the Cupid peperomia. But that's really only if you're an overwater. General purpose potting mix, vast majority of the time works just fine.
Well, I want to come in here with simplification. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Oh, yes. Yes, you're good.
Okay. I think we try to make it more complicated than it needs to be. If you have a soilless mix that you bought at a garden center, use that. You don't need anything else. Use that. If you have tap water in your house, you use that. We've already determined that humidity doesn't matter. It can be dry or high humidity. Don't worry about that. Fertilization. House plants will live for years with no fertilizer. I've proven it. So as long as you don't leave it over the overwater problem that everybody agrees on, which means setting the plant in a saucer of water for days, that kills every plant. If you don't do that, there's not much else to worry about.
That's awesome news. That's really good news. We don't have to overcomplicate things. So that's
Yeah.
really helpful.
Okay.
So then the other question has to do with, traditionally you look at certain house plants and if they're root bound, or you can kind of tell when they need to be repotted. What about peperomia? Should you repot them at a certain stage? So that's part of the question. The other question, orchids are kind of finicky and want a certain kind of pot that they're in. Is there any difference between, a clay pot or a plastic pot? What can you grow your peperomia in at home? In addition to that repotting question. So I've got both I'm throwing out at you.
So jumping on what Gary said, anything that will hold the soil should be just fine for a peperomia. Really, the type of material is more, it's more of a personal consideration. Terracotta, for example, is porous. And if you live like where the air is drier, that may mean more evaporation. So you may need to water it more often than if it's in like a glazed ceramic or a plastic pot. Depending on the type of display you have, if your shelves are heavy, you may not want glazed ceramic or terracotta. You might want a lighter weight plastic. If you move your plants a lot or you carry them to the sink to water, lighter weight might be better. And of course, the aesthetic that you like, but the type of material is really makes no difference in the plant whatsoever.
Okay, and then what about size? Do they like to be a little bit more confined, or do they like plenty of room to stretch out? They want that king size bed. What are they? They're fine in a baby bed, or do they want the king size bed?
So they tolerate being root. Oh, sorry, Gary.
Well, I'm going to say we grow 300,000 little pots, so we know they grow in little pots. And the question is, should they be transplanted into something else? My opinion there is small pots dry out fast. If you don't want to water it all the time, put it in a slightly bigger pot. You don't have to water it as often. That's the practical question. The plant will live either way.
Yeah, they tolerate being root bound really, really well. I wouldn't say they enjoy it, but I've had Peperomia obtusifolia, for example, that was growing well, that I had to repot because the plant was just too big and it kept tipping over for the little plastic pot it was in.
Sure.
And so it was much more, again, my consideration than for what appeared to be the plant health.
I don't have anything to add. Y'all said everything about that.
Okay. So we got a couple things here where they may or may not have been my personal experience. I hate to even admit it because you guys are making them sound like they're super easy. But the plants, the leaves on mine got yellow on one peperomia I had, and another one, it just kind of got mushy and wilted, and I'm pretty sure I overwatered it in that case. What about yellow leaves? What would that indicate?
Usually,
go ahead.
Sorry, no, you, Heather.
No, you don't. No, you insist.
Usually too much or too little water, and unfortunately, it's a root issue for both. Too much water, the roots are starting to suffocate, so they can't absorb enough water for the plant. Not enough water, there's not enough water for the plant there, so they start out pretty similarly. One word of advice, especially if you like to get your plants from a big box type retailer that may not do the best job caring for their plants, is that there may be issues setting in before you get it. You know, and it's hard to tell, you know, when those issues first are at their onset. So sometimes people run into situations where the plant fails, and it's not their fault.
Right. I have to apologize. There's peacocks in my neighborhood, and that's if you hear the strange sound in the background. The peacocks. It's their mating season. So anyway,
Okay.
um, anyway, I was agreeing with what Justin was saying, and plus salt buildup in the box store if they're not taking care and they're not watering correctly, and they're just giving you a light sprinkle on the top. You can get salt buildup too, which can cause the foliage to yellow. So sometimes a good bleaching where you just like, you know, water it, make sure it's thoroughly watered, and then it's coming out the bottom can help with that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably good advice with a lot of different houseplants, correct?
Mhm.
Is that if you're not draining it out enough, that salt will build up and then
Mhm.
cause some leaf discoloration or something like that. So another question, would most peperomia varieties do well in a north-facing window? Are there some that would do better than others?
So this question is always an awkward one for me, and it might be because I'm a little too you know, I'm a little too detail oriented. You know, and just talking about a window exposure is tough because like a 2 foot by 2 foot window is going to let in a very different amount of light than like a 6 foot by 6 foot window, or if there's an oak tree in front of your window or not. But in general, most peperomia will do okay in medium lights. So if it's right in the windowsill, if you have it like 3 or 4 feet away from, you know, what might be an average north-facing window, then you might see very little growth. What growth you do see may start to get really stringy or leggy, and a lot less attractive. Your plant will also use a lot less water in those conditions, so it's a lot easier to overwater it. So I would recommend the brighter light than the low light, but with care, you can probably get away with right in a north-facing window.
And I think you read my mind because I was going to ask what will happen to my peperomia plant if it's not getting enough light. So kind of like tomatoes or peppers that you're starting indoors, they'll get leggy. They'll probably get a little weak, I'm assuming. Any other
Exactly, yeah.
indicators that they're not getting enough light?
On some varieties, the foliage may be a little more pale. You know, it's not the rich, lush green that we associate with a lot of peperomia. I haven't seen issues with variegation. You know, some of the other plants, variegation may fade if it's not getting enough light. I haven't seen that with peperomia, but it could potentially happen. I know Gary or Heather, if you guys have any more experience with low light.
I want to mention that my neighbor grower, a commercial grower, puts her peperomia under the bench, which means it's very low light, and she says they do better. So it's proving that low light is okay. Move that to a house condition, and north is the least light we have, the lowest light we have in the house, and I'm sure they'll survive just fine.
Because they grow in their habitat, they're under the canopy, like towards the bottom, where there is low light in the rainforest. So I imagine, and it's just another. They're just such versatile plants that can take such a wide range of conditions, which is unusual.
That's why it's the year of the peperomia. It's the best plant.
It is, yes. We've got one more question from the audience, and I think I'm asking it correctly, but the new growth it gets black. Any idea why some new growth might come out black or turn black, dark?
Doesn't sound good.
It doesn't sound good.
That's why
I think they knew that.
You know, it probably depends on the variety. You know, different varieties show symptomology a little bit differently. I have seen cases where cold damage will blacken a plant, but I wouldn't expect it just to be on the new growth.
Mm-mm.
Well, I tell you what, here's something we can do. I think Ida, if you email me a picture of this, then I will share it with our experts and we'll find out an answer to you. I will put my email in the chat. So that way we will take care of a problem for Ida, and hopefully she will get a lot more successful. So we'll do that. What I was wanting to do now in our last few minutes, so we're talking about peperomia. How would you want to conclude this webinar? Would you say that we picked a great plant for our first year, focusing on house plants? I'm assuming that is yes. Um, and is there another one that you're like, okay, well, there's so many peperomias, but I also like X. So I think we've got tons to offer everybody with all the different varieties of peperomia, but is there another one that you like or would want to include in there?
Can I go?
Yes.
Okay. This is another one we grow. This is Peperomia tuberensis.
Ooh.
Not common, but the leaves are similar striped as to the watermelon peperomia. This is just as easy as any other one we've been talking about. And we grow them in small pots or small baskets. Anyway, tuberensis. It needs a common name. So
Super. Super
can we call it
It's a super plant. I don't know.
turbo?
Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Mm.
Okay, that's good.
I don't know. I feel like we've covered all the peperomias that are in the Dooman collection, with the exception of the angulata, which looked a lot like the tetragonum, but instead has a trailing habit. And there's two in it. One has a darker foliage with the green veining, and the other one has like a light green foliage with the white veining. But I know there's over.
Can you say that name again or spell it?
Oh, the Peperomia angulata, Angulata.
Okay. Okay.
And then, yeah, that's it.
And Justin, some closing thoughts from you on either your favorite or another one that we didn't talk about?
I'm a big fan of Peperomia scandens, Scandens.
Yeah.
It has a trailing habit, so it's kind of trendy. It has really heart-shaped leaves, and the most common variety is edged in creamy white. A lot of people actually mistake it for a pothos, because superficially from a distance it has that same look. But I think that's just a delightful basket to have hanging in a bright window.
Excellent. So we have 3 more types of peperomia to entice everybody. So maybe they'll go out now to their local garden retailer online and try to find some of these. It's all very, very fun. Sounds like you'll be very successful with these tips from our experts. And with that, believe it or not, an hour has flown by. So Heather, Gary, Justin, thank you so much for your tips, your information, your favorites, your insights. It's all good. And we thank everybody who was on this webinar, and stay tuned for additional ones, and stay tuned for next year when our houseplant is orchids. So
Ooh.
maybe we can have
Hey.
our same experts back next year to talk about orchid care. It might be a little bit more complex than peperomia. We'll see. But with that, I will thank everybody, and we will send out a video recording of this webinar in the next day or two. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week.